focused on food security. So the focus is still on food security. We are broadening. I would need more details. If you want to email me later, that's fine. We are broadening it more, so it's not just necessarily infrastructure like those regional studies, but we still are keeping focus on food security and strengthening the food system. So if you had a project that, as I mentioned before, maybe wasn't necessarily in a low income community, but you can still make the case that this is strengthening the overall food system of the state, then I think it's fair to apply for that. Somebody asked, how detailed does a list of expenses need to be? For example, there will be many, many items needed for facilities improvement construction projects we'd like to apply for. Does every single item need to be listed? So I would say yes, because it will save you the trouble in the long run. So for this grant, when you're reimbursing, you can reimburse for shipping as well as the actual items. So when you're making your budget, you want to include all of that in the cost for the item, because say it comes to reimbursement, you didn't put shipping in your budget, but now the shipping cost you want to reimburse for, that would come out of your overall budget and it would take money from a different line item. So it's better to be more detailed so you have that wiggle room with, I know that there's going to be shipping and I know that's something I want to reimburse for, rather than later down the line realizing I'm going to have to take money from something else in order to reimburse for this shipping. So someone asked about expenses to obtain SNAP, like the equipment to process it. So if it's like a physical piece of equipment, like you need a specific machine or something to process it, you could absolutely apply for that. We wouldn't reimburse for the like paperwork if there was a fee to get SNAP or something like that. But if it's like a physical piece of equipment that would help you be able to process SNAP at your location, then absolutely. So somebody asked, if you don't have the cash you need to purchase a large item for the grant for reimbursement, is it acceptable to take a loan once the project is approved and use the reimbursement to pay off loan? Yes, we have many people who use loans for their reimbursement project. I would just make sure that the loan company that you're going with is aware that the reimbursement process takes time. It can usually be up to 60 days between when you submit and when we process it and you see it in your bank account. So just to be aware of any fees or things that would come along with that, but there's absolutely no problem to use a loan to pay for it and then pay off that loan. Somebody else asked about rent. I'm going to follow up on that along with the question about leasing land. That would depend on a lot of details. If you already have the facility, one of the things with that is we want this grant to be a launching point and you to be able to demonstrate that you can take on the funding or the responsibility after this year grant drops off, because this is not a long-term funding. So we really want to make sure that we fund projects that can demonstrate that long-term they can take on the expenses associated with upkeeping whatever project it is. Are farmers markets eligible to apply? Absolutely. We have a lot of farmers markets. Some make new stands, some do mobile markets, some buy equipment like card machines or things to just make it run smoothly, but absolutely farmers markets can apply. So somebody said they received food trucks in the first round of the grant. We noticed that we are needing a refrigerated truck to transport food from pantries. So you could apply for the refrigeration of the truck. I would just be explicitly clear in your application that you're applying for the refrigeration and not the truck itself, because reviewers may initially see that and think, oh, this person's already applied for this funding. But so just make it clear that you're applying to revamp the truck and make it refrigerated and not for the actual trucks themselves. But you can absolutely apply to retrofit your truck with refrigeration. Somebody said, would renovation of a pantry space for improved storage and distribution be an allowable project? Absolutely. That's some of the things we're looking for. We want this to allow you all to be able to better serve your community or your constituents or wherever you are. So improving storage and distributions definitely falls under things that we would cover. I would just talk about in your application how the renovation would allow you to obviously store more, but increase distribution. Maybe if you could give an estimate of how many more people you think you could serve monthly. It doesn't have to be a precise number, but just really showing how much that this renovation would improve your space. But absolutely, you could apply for that and it's allowable. So cold storage and refrigerations are definitely reimbursable. I will follow up on any rent lease related questions, and I will post the answer to the website so everyone can reference it. Somebody asked about any fulfillment reports required along the way while your project is in process. This is a great question. Thank you for bringing it up. So as a part of the project, in addition to reimbursements, we require monthly reports and final reports. So to start with the monthly reports, these are super short. They're like 4 questions. What we're really looking for is just, how's your project going? Are you hitting any roadblocks? Is your budget all set? Are you still, in line to finish it in the right amount and by the June 30th deadline? And then if you have any other additional comments or concerns. So we use those monthly to just read over, and then it allows me to reach out to anyone who has expressed any type of concerns and see what kind of troubleshooting we could do. The other report that I mentioned is the final report. So this report is required at the end of the grant. And this report asks about the project overall, how the implementation went, if you stayed in budget, if it's been enough time, how this project has increased your distribution, transportation, production, et cetera, whatever. And so it's a little more in depth about like the overall impact once your project's done. Obviously, it might be a short timeline between finishing your project and the deadline for the reports. So there's no penalty if it's not the most detailed final report in general, but we're just looking for detail on the impacts or any information on the impacts that this report is having for your organization and your ability to serve others. So somebody asked, if we are constructing a structure, would you want a price for every aspect of the structure, not just the overall price for construction? Yes, so I would want to see a quote for every item that you're getting. So if you're getting a bunch of, like, say, cement blocks, you don't have to list them one by one. You could just say 12 cement blocks for this price. But I would list all of the expenses that you're going to have. And then if you are later on deciding that you want to take out some of those items, or you decide you're going to pay for that part yourself, you'll still have that wiggle room in your budget if anything else goes above on other line items. So I would put in as many things that you need for your project as possible. I also mentioned before that as we're reviewing it, the state does have the option to remove line items. So I would put in everything that you would possibly need, just in case that there are some parts that get taken out or other parts that you'd wished you'd put in. Somebody asked about installing internet. You can install internet to help with SNAP or HIP, but like I said, it's with the goal that after the year of funding is over, you will be able to take on that expense for your company by yourself, and you'll be able to maintain that internet. So somebody asked about an independent contractor for eligible expenses. It would depend what the independent contractor is doing. So if the independent contractor, say, was doing a study of your organization or your program, kind of like a regional study, to determine any gaps or any needs, that's something you could apply for under the regional study, and just explain that this contractor is helping with costs. Or if there's a contractor that's helping with renovations or something like that, absolutely. Just remember, if it's renovations, they have to be licensed in the state of Massachusetts. Can you use funds to create a renovated greenhouse? Yes, we have funded a lot of greenhouse projects. So somebody asked about a match program. So we don't fund match programs. It has to be either an infrastructure project or, like I said, one of those regional or a case study about food security in your community or in your organization or where you serve. Somebody asked, could we ask for a smaller refrigerated truck to help with transport, as the larger food trucks are better for distributing food to community? We need a truck to transport food safely from food banks to our food pantry. Yes, you can submit for a smaller truck, an electric truck, a van. You can submit for any type of vehicle as long as you can make the case that this vehicle is helping us decrease food insecurity through X, Y, and Z. So there is no, I mean, other than it being purchased new, there's no qualifications for how big or small the truck has to be. Just has to be, you have to be able to make the case of how this is helping your organization. So somebody asked, could you clarify what is allowable under information technology needs? Specifically, is this just for physical hardware IT, or can it be for software development? Yes, so it is not just physical hardware IT, it's also for software development. So you could pay a developer to fix your website or app, and then if there's a subscription fee, we often will pay that for the startup costs, with the expectation, and I'm sorry I sound like a broken record and keep repeating myself, but with the expectation that after, you guys will be able to take on that fee. So it does not have to be just a physical piece of IT hardware. And obviously, if you pay a developer who's coming in and training or setting it up, we would be able to reimburse you for that. Somebody asked, can funding be used to update and improve space of our food pantry? Our food pantry is not currently open due to issues with an older building and costs associated with improving space. Yeah, you could absolutely apply for updating and improving the space of your food pantry. I would just demonstrate in your application that once this project is completed and the improvements and the upgrades are made, that you'll be able to reopen and cover the rest of the costs associated with doing the business. But you can absolutely apply for improving the space that you have. So somebody asked, if you're applying for some sort of construction, do we need to provide proof of any relevant permits or approvals? So if it's on your privately owned land that you're doing the construction on, say a renovation to a barn that you already have, and it's not APR protected land or anything of that sort, then you don't necessarily need to provide permitting information. You will obviously need a permit to begin construction and do it all, but you do not need to provide it. If you are on APR land or land that is not owned by you, if it's rented land or etc., then you would have to show that you have permission to be doing the construction on that land. Somebody said, but if a contractor is building a structure and giving us an overall quote, is that not good? No, that's fine. So if it's something that's like a greenhouse or a pop-up shed that you can't get like a broken down itemized list of like, this is how much the windows are going to cost, this is how much the painting is going to cost, that's fine. I'm just talking about if you're buying materials to then buy something, that's fine. But if it's just one contractor building an overall structure, I would say give as much details as you can. But if it's just like in your application about what the project will entail, but if the contractor is only giving you a quote for the overall, say, building, that's okay too. We're not going to fault you for what you're able to get. If your area has a housing shortage, is housing for processing employees feasible? That's a great question. I don't think that we have yet to have a project for that. So I will follow up with you on that, because I don't want to give you a wrong answer on that. And again, all of these follow-up answers will be posted to the mass.gov website. So you can find them there. But I'm not sure, and I will get back to you on that. So somebody said, if we applied in FY22, but were not awarded, can we assume it wasn't necessarily related to the proposal as a whole, given the Absolutely, there were some great proposals that didn't get funded just because of limited funding, and maybe some other proposals slightly edged them out. But that does not mean that your proposal was bad. If you have specific questions about your project and you want to run it by me, I'm happy to do that. But this is a very competitive program, and unfortunately, funding is limited. But I absolutely am happy to answer. As I said, I'm going to leave my email in the chat, and I'm happy to answer any specific questions related to a past proposal or a future proposal. I'm just going to put my email in the chat for 1 second, and then I will get back to all of your questions. Somebody asked if purchasing a vehicle, can registration, insurance, etc. be covered? So we will only cover the vehicle. Any fees or permits associated with that would have to be covered by the awardee. So we do not allow the purchase of used equipment. This is feedback that we've gotten a lot, and I completely understand how hard it is to get new equipment and how expensive it has become. Unfortunately, since our team size is so small, we do not have the ability for used equipment to check to make sure that it's up to safety regulations, to check where it's coming from, the price, and all of those things. So at this time, only new equipment is allowed. It is something that we have gotten the feedback on, and we understand how important it is and how difficult it's been. And it's something that we are continuing to think about and consider as a team. But for this upcoming round, all of the equipment must be purchased new. So somebody said that our staff person time would be recruiting food donors, volunteers, and social service agencies and connecting them through our technology platform app. So that wouldn't really fit under IT. If it was you were redesigning the app to make it more accessible, then that is something, or you're having an IT person come in, that would be eligible, but we don't cover overhead costs associated with doing businesses. So somebody asked, do we need to have completed our project in its entirety by the end of the grant period, or is it enough to just have purchased the equipment fixtures by the end of the grant term? So this will depend on your contract. When you're applying for your application and submitting the budget, you have the option to apply for setup if it's something that requires like construction. You obviously want it to be built. If it's electrical related, you want the hookups to be completed. So if you apply and include setup costs in your grant, the entire thing would have to be completed by June 30th in order to receive all of that reimbursement. If you're just applying for a piece of equipment but not applying for the setup, that's an expense that you're going to handle on your own, then all you need to have to do is receive the equipment by that time frame. So it's fully dependent on how you structure and submit your budget. So somebody asked, once you have a signed contract, could it ever be revoked so you are personally responsible for project costs? We have not had that happen, to say. You would have to violate your contract terms, and I think that would be extremely difficult to do as long as you're following all of the guidelines. And when we send you your contracting document, we make it, I think, very clear about purchasing new, purchasing within the timeline. And I'm also going to always be there to answer any questions if you're second guessing something. But I wouldn't say it's impossible to get your contract revoked, but it's not something that we have done in this program so far. So somebody asked, is rented equipment allowable? So we allow rented equipment if you're renting like a truck or a trailer to complete a project, or if you're renting like a tractor for a short time, but we wouldn't cover if it was just a one-term purchase, like you're purchasing ice one time. It would have to be a rentable equipment for a specific project. Now, if it's for a specific project that, say you're building something and you need a one-time ice purchase, you could maybe make the case for that, but usually the rentable equipment that we have funded is specifically for like completing a construction project. I see a hand raised, so I'm gonna switch over to that shortly, and then I'll go back to the Q&A. Jeffrey?
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm wondering if the EEA has any preference or how the EEA works with people with business owners with disabilities. Thank you for bringing me in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. That is definitely something that we would work with you on, making the application more accessible. I would reach out to me when you submit, or when you're going to submit your application after reviewing the RFR, and we can figure out what specific needs you would need to complete the application, because we want this to be accessible to everyone and everyone to be able to apply.
I understand that. The question was in selecting successful applicants.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that part.
I
Yes,
didn't say it, so my question wasn't was that accurate.
so you're asking about considering disabilities when accepting applications?
Right.
Okay, yes. So on our application, we have a question that asks about disabilities, if you're veteran owned, women owned, BIPOC owned, and those will all be considered. And you won't be disadvantaged if you don't follow or fall into any of those categories, but it is something we look at when looking at applications.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to switch back to the Q&A. So someone asked if I could expand a bit on regional case studies. Absolutely. This is something new that we are implementing this year. What we're really trying to do is just continue to understand any of the gaps in our food system. So what we're looking for is, and when I say regional, that can mean different things to different people. It could be your community, it could be your county, it could be a few cities. But what we want to see is a study of food insecurity in that area. And that could mean different things for different studies. So as I said, for one example, you could do a study on how food insecurity is affecting health. So you could say there's a lack, you've noticed a lack of fresh food in your community. So you're now doing a study on how that lack of fresh food has increased specific illnesses in your community and how those could help to be alleviated by that fresh food. And that's just one example. There's really no wrong that you can do with a regional case study. You could look at climate change and say how climate change has been affecting the ability to grow crops in your city and how that's affecting food securities. You could also just look at food insecurity in your area. You could see if there are any measures or supports or organizations helping alleviate that right now. If there are, you could see how you could analyze how successful they are. If they aren't, then you could say, this is the gap we've noticed, and this is how we maybe propose to close the gap, or how closing this gap would help serve our community better. So it's very broad for a reason, because we don't know what fits each community, and you all are the experts in your own community. So that's why we're looking towards you to identify any gaps. And if you are thinking about going that route and you have any questions, please reach out to me and I'm happy to give more detail. Before the application goes live in mid-January, I can answer any specific questions anyone may have about their project. However, once the application is live online, I cannot answer specific questions related to individual projects. Any questions I answer will have to be answered publicly and posted on the website, and I won't be able to specifically say, hey, this project sounds good, or hey, I would reframe this way. So if you are thinking about that route and you're unsure, feel free to email me now this week and next week, and I'm happy to directly address or answer any of those questions. Somebody asked about earmarks. Can the FSIG grant be seen as a match? So you would have to ask your specific program about if the FSIG program would be a match for that. The funds that you have already received in terms of FSIG will not be a deterrent to for FSIG, you will not be seen as a deterrent if you've received funding from a different program, as long as you're not applying for something that's already state funded. So say you received funding for a greenhouse from a different program, you could apply for FSIG for something related to growing food or production, but you couldn't apply for a greenhouse. So as long as you're not trying to double dip funds, other funding won't necessarily be held against you in terms of you've already received funding, so we're not going to give you FSIG funding. So somebody asked, will a project be more likely to be awarded if a grant if the total requested dollar falls below a certain amount? So we don't necessarily award like this project because it's under this amount, or not award this one because it's over this amount. What we look for is that all of the expenses you're submitting are relevant. So if you have a $500,000 proposal and all of the elements of it are relevant, then there's no problem with hitting the max budget. Say you submit a $500,000 proposal, you really maybe only need 350 of that, and the other 150 you submitted for are things that we may not consider relevant for this project, then we may only fund you for 350, but you will not be penalized for submitting for any amount if that's what it needs or you need to complete your project. We give that max because there are some projects that need that much funding, and we want to be able to do those larger scale projects. So somebody asks, are you looking to fund those case studies, or having the case studies on hand makes you more qualified? So we are looking to fund those case studies. We are not expecting these case studies to have been completed or maybe even started in some cases before this funding. So we are looking to actually fund people doing these case studies. If you are submitting for an infrastructure project and you have a case study that shows that you've identified this gap, then absolutely that would strengthen your application. But we aren't expecting these to already be completed if you're just looking for funding to do a case study. That is completely independent of any other type of infrastructure project. So somebody asked, when will the application go live? So we don't have a definitive date, but it's going to be in mid-January. So in the next 2-ish weeks, it will be posted. We're just giving time for any follow-up questions from these webinars to come through so I can answer specific questions, because as I mentioned, once application goes live, I can't do that. And then I want to be able to post both of the Q&A sessions as well as the PowerPoint online, so people have time to reference those and look them over before the application goes live. Somebody asked, could one application have a budget for case study and infrastructure need? Absolutely. So you could say you are doing a case study to look at like this gap in the food system in your area, and also this infrastructure need, which could be a previously identified need that you were going to reference in your case study, or it could be a separate project. I think it would be a stronger application if you could somehow tie a case study into your infrastructure need and make them related, but you don't necessarily, like, you could apply for the two things in one as long as they fit in that 500K budget. So the old, someone asked if there's an old application for review. The old application should be on the mass.gov website. I'm pulling it up right now to just see if I can link it. It's called RFR, and it should be on the FY22, or yes, 22 one should be online. I'm going to attempt to link this in the chat, but if it doesn't work and you can't find it online, again, you can email me and I'm happy to send that to you. Somebody said, are any projects too small? There are no projects that are too small. As long as you can demonstrate that need for your organization, there's nothing too small. We funded projects that were under $1,000, around $1,000. It's really, there's no penalty if your project is small or if it's large. It's really just that you have a need for this. Somebody asked, what is the target percentage of awards to commercial for-profit food distributors versus nonprofit entities serving food insecure people? Great question. So we don't have a target percentage from the get-go. The way that we've done it in the past 2 rounds is based on the percentage of applications that are received. So say we get roughly 20% of applications are producers, distributors, and 15% are nonprofits. We would reserve 20% of the funding for that first group when we're going into the review sessions, because we review by sector. So we'll have in mind, okay, we have 20% of the funding for this because they were 20% of the applications. Then when we go to review nonprofits, we'll do the same thing, 15%, 15%. Obviously, there are some wiggle room if there's a smaller percentage of applications from one sector, or if there's a project that we really, really want to fund, we always will leave ourselves wiggle room, but it's roughly related to the percentage of applications received. Somebody asked, would it benefit an application score to describe how the business serves underserved communities through its employment practices? Example, hiring immigrants or recently incarcerated individual, or offering ownership opportunity through. So yes to both of those. We want to see how you're serving your community. So if you can show that you are hiring people who otherwise would not have the opportunity for this employment, absolutely right, because that is also helping food insecurity. If you're helping people be able to afford to live and to eat, as well as your organization is serving an underserved community, then that's a bigger strength for your organization. Also, ownership opportunities, yes, that is great to see. We related to that, we love to see collaboration of any kind, whether it's between different communities or organizations, or just people working together. So yes to both of those. So somebody asked about 20% being for nonprofits. I just use 20% and nonprofits as a random example. There is no reserved amount for any sector. It is all based on how many applications we've received in the percentage. So if nonprofits were 30%, then we would roughly reserve 30% of funding for them. But it's not like picked out previous to applications. So this will be totally dependent on how many from each sector that we receive. So there is no, it's not to discourage anyone. We're not trying to favor any sector over another. We're just trying to create a fair system for each sector that applies. If anybody else has any questions, please feel free to submit through the Q&A or raise your hand. I'm sorry, this is a lot of me talking and I appreciate you guys sticking through it. Please do not feel obligated to stay on the whole time. If you have to jump, this will be recorded and posted to the website. So we do not cover overhead and administrative fees under this grant. Jeffrey, did you have another question?
Yes, thank you for bringing me back in again, Rebecca. My 2022 application was rejected, and there were similar businesses that were accepted. I'm wondering if there is any way to find out why my application was rejected to make it stronger for this 2023 application.
Yes, absolutely. So for both rejected and approved applications, you can request your score sheets. So each application had two reviewers, 2 to 3 reviewers, and they each did a score sheet, which breaks down how you scored in each category based on the application questions. So if you email me, I would be happy to send you your score sheets. And if you see the score sheets and you still have questions about why something particular wasn't funded, I'm happy to have a call or a Zoom or anything to clarify it more. But absolutely, please email me and I can send score sheets.
Thank you.
So someone's talked about staffing time to manage a construction project. No, we unfortunately cannot cover any administrative fees related to the implementation of the project. Somebody asked, does the infrastructure funding cover renovation costs or only the purchase of capital items? Can it be used to pay off the loan of something already purchased in the last year? So starting with the first part of that, we can absolutely cover any renovation costs you have to an existing building, whether that's expanding it or upgrading it, adding storage, adding refrigeration. You can submit for those. You cannot submit to pay off a loan on something that's already been purchased. As I mentioned, everything that you submit for reimbursement has to be purchased during your contracting time. So if you'd purchased something before your contract was executed, we would not be able to reimburse for that. So any past loans won't be available to be reimbursed for, but a renovation for an existing building is definitely something that you could apply for. Jennifer?
There, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So this is a really specific issue,
Yep.
but I am a licensed contractor who turned farmer 3 years ago commercially. And so I carry my construction supervisor's license in Massachusetts. I have been doing all of the work around the farm based on pulling permits through my license. Is
Mhm.
that a legal or an illegal move?
For the grant, I would say legal. As long as you are currently licensed and you can prove that, which it seems like you are, then you would count as a licensed contractor on the program.
Okay, so then only the items like electrical or plumbing or where you need to have a specialty license, those are the items where you would need to see quotes from those trades. But if I were putting together a trade to frame something, that could be an estimate that I do exclusively through my company.
Yeah, so since you are the contractor in this case, if you can provide quotes that are showing like this is actually what it would cost, then that is fine. If it's something you're outsourcing like electrical to a different registered contractor, then we would need to see quotes from them.
Okay, thank you.
So somebody asked, what is the anticipated award timeline? Are there issues that would likely delay the awards as past roles have been significantly delayed, consequently delaying the grant periods? So yes, this was an ongoing problem in the first 2 rounds, and that's why these awards are for the next fiscal year. So there will be no pressure to get your project done by June 30th of this year. So you will get your contract in July and then have an entire calendar year, which means that gives us between when the contract goes live in January all the way to July to get you your executed contract and give you that full year to complete your project. Lindsay?
Yes, I just want to clarify my question
Absolutely.
on that, because it's not so much the end date, it's the start date. And in previous rounds, the challenges were that we were submitting for costs, say that were anticipated to start accruing in March, anticipating that we would have gotten an award in December. And so then the contractors or equipment is ready to be purchased, but yet our contract wasn't actually executed until April, which then pushed out the whole supply chain. So it's not so much the end of the contract period, it's more the beginning. Like, when should we, if we have a project that we plan to have in spring of 2023, is it realistic to think that applicants will be notified and awarded in that timeline? Or should we not be applying for projects that need to start before X date, August 1st or something?
Yeah, so the start date for all of the projects will be July 1st because that's the start of our new fiscal year. So that is the date that you should plan to start all of your construction or anything related. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, sorry, I didn't know if I was still on. I didn't know if I was back on mute. Yeah.
You're okay.
Yes, thank
So
you.
there's a possibility that contracting could go faster and you may get your contract in June, but I would anticipate July 1st being the hard start date.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Jeffrey?
Yeah, thanks again. Is the grant available to municipalities and or towns for community gardens, or say increasing shellfish for sustenance for residents or community?
Yeah, so municipalities can absolutely apply. We can't fund food specifically, but if you're looking to increase like shelving or something to hold the food or related project, yes. We can't reimburse the food itself, but municipalities who have infrastructure projects or those regional case studies can absolutely apply.
Thank you.
Yep. So somebody again asked about rent in the past. That is not something that we have reimbursed, but it's something that I am going to follow up, especially for a newly leased facility. I think I've gotten through all the questions, so please, if anyone else has any other questions, you could raise your hand, you can submit the Q&A, even if they're specific to your proposed project, I'm happy to answer them. Again, if you have to jump, this will be posted online and you can always follow up with me via email. I know that it's late and people have a lot going on and I really appreciate all of your time, so please don't feel obligated to stay on the whole time, but I'm more than happy to keep answering any questions. So somebody asked, can construction start before the contract period if it's not built until after? So no, construction cannot start before a contract period because you have to submit an invoice with your reimbursement. So the invoice usually will have the date that your contract was made, not necessarily your contract, but the work began with the construction company. So if we see that the construction started before the contract period, we will not be able to reimburse it. Now, say the contract period, right, starts July 1st, but you get a contract back mid-June with a signed date for June, you can begin in June because you have that executed contract. But anything before that executed contract will not be eligible for reimbursement, and that's an expense that you would end up on the hook for. So the application deadline will be 6 weeks after the application is posted, which will be mid-January, but when it is posted, there will be a very explicit deadline, but the application will be live for 6 weeks once it's posted. Somebody asked about they're an online grocery retailer who doesn't yet accept SNAP or EBT. They would like to hire an employee to develop a solution for us and pay fees to the financial processing vendor. So I'm not sure about the fees. I would need more detail for that. But if say you're hiring a consultant who is developing an IT solution for you to be able to accept SNAP and EBT, whether that's you buy this new piece of payment system like a POS, and then you're hiring someone who is setting that up and any of the process that come along with that, you could submit for that POS system and for the setup for that. So somebody asked that they're planning on applying for several pieces of equipment. Would it benefit our application to try to demonstrate the value that we will get from each item? Example, how much cheaper it would make our food products? Yes. The more detail you can provide, the better. And I'm not saying it needs to be an essay for each item, but if you're asking for 4 or 5 items, we want to see that all of these items are important. Because if you don't give a lot of description on certain items, the reviewer may see that and say, well, they don't really need this piece of equipment, so we'll take that off and fund the rest of it. So I would, as best as you can, try to detail how important each piece of funding is, or each piece of equipment is to be funded. So this will make food production cheaper. This will allow us to distribute further, et cetera, et cetera. So as much more detail is better than none. And if you have like a specific piece of equipment and like how you want to run by your justification for it, that is absolutely something that you can email me and I'm happy to look at. Does anybody else have, any questions? I see some people have to sign off. You are totally fine. I appreciate all of your time, especially late at night after work hours, when I'm sure everyone is super tired. Please keep sending in questions if you have them. If they come to you later, please email me. I'm always available. If there are no more questions, then we can end here. I'm sure you guys have listened to me talk for way too long, but I really appreciate you all coming and sticking through it. I will be posting the recording as well as any questions or the answers to any questions that needed follow-up onto the website sometime next week. So please look out for that. Again, if you have any questions related to a future application or a previous application, please feel free to email me and I'm more than happy to help with that. Again, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your questions and comments and insight. And please follow up if you have any other questions. Someone just asked, would it be all right to send you an abstract or summary? Yes, so if you want to send anything specific, make sure you do it before the application is posted, because once that is posted, I cannot answer any specific questions related to your project. So if you have something that you're kind of not sure about, but you're considering, I would send that to me if you could sometime next week. So I have the chance to give you a specific answer before we get into that period of the application being posted and me not being able to answer any specific questions. Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I will stop the recording and just want to say